it's a WPL update. Hi everyone, welcome back to RC Pi, and following on from that WPL unboxing, there's a few things that I wanted to do straight away before I even take it out for its first drive. As you saw, that horrible out of phase drive shaft just drove me completely mad. Now I had a look in my spares and I had one spare drive shaft which will work for the rear. So just to explain or confirm for you what I mean by out of phase drive shafts, this is the WPL one that came as standard. Now you've got the two different halves of the drive shaft, one connected to the gearbox and one connected to the axle, and the tongue that protrudes from the main body of the drive shaft should be aligned at each end. Now you can see this one is on top where it meets that kind of knuckle, but on this end it's on the sides. Now with some drive shafts you can take these out and you can rotate them and put them in different positions, but sadly this can only go the same way around. So that is out of phase, so that when they're at an angle they're kind of clunking to try and find the position. Whereas this that I'm about to put in, this drive shaft is in phase, so you can see on the two halves you've got the tongue lined up with the other end, so that will give you much smoother motion when it's rotating. What I've done is I've taken the axle off the leaf springs. Now you have to do that, you have to take off the front of the leaf spring. There's a bolt in there, you have to take that off and then unscrew the axle mounts with the helper springs, and that releases the axle. And what I found is when this axle was new and fitted, the mesh of these gears was not smooth, it was clunky and horrible. But with it on the other side, it's a much better fit. So this is something I would recommend you to do, even if you're using the same drive shaft. Now, because you're flipping the side, because you're going to flip the way round the axle is, you need to change the input to the pumpkin from one side to the other. Interestingly, the gears in there are metal, so that's kind of cool. So that, flipping the axle, changing that pumpkin round, that's a no-brainer that you should do that. But one thing that I think I'm going to do as well, I think I'm going to remove one of these helper springs, because I think it just needs to, I think the car needs to sit down a little bit more. I think those springs need to be a little bit softer. So I'm going to remove one of those from each leaf. So there were a few things that I wanted to get done. One of them was to strip down the body and give it a nice bit of colour, because that white didn't really do much for me. If it had been glossy, it might have worked a bit better, but I thought we could do a bit better. So I'll quickly show a bit of video of stripping down that body, and then I'll show you what we've done with it. Now the main part here of removing the chassis and that sort of first deck from the interior and the body itself is straightforward. It's those 6 screws, 2 at each end and 2 in the middle, and then you can lift those rails off, unplug the battery wire and the servo wire from the board, and then you've just got to undo these, I think it's 5 screws to get the interior off. There's a bit of fiddling, but it comes out okay. Then you've got lots of bits attached to the body shell itself. So the side windows are on one piece that goes over the top there. Front and rear ones push out, but they are a bit fiddly, so be careful with those. You don't want to break the tabs off or break your window frames off.
And then once you've finally got those, you've got to get rid of all the little detail pieces. Now, the way these have been made, I think it looks like they should have been melted into place, but apart from one of mine, they hadn't, and they pushed or pried out fairly easily. But just be careful, because they can break very easily. But once you've got them all out, you're left with a clean body shell, which, with a bit of soap and water, doesn't need any primer. It's all good for painting.
Here is the painted body, totally stripped and painted. I've used a Tamiya TS54, which is light metallic blue. Just done spray with that. I think I'm going to get a gloss coat to seal that in, give it that nice shine, but I think it's looking pretty good. One thing that a couple of people have asked is about the actual size of this and the wheelbase and so on. So I've just confirmed that it's a 200mm wheelbase. So that does actually make it spot on as a 1/10 car. Now, if we compare the size to this is the MN99 body, which is supposed to be 12th scale, but we can tell it's the same wheelbase, and we know that a Jimny is much smaller than a Land Rover Defender. So that makes it fairly clear that this is bigger scale than that little Defender. The other question that I had, well, let's just compare it to a typical 10th scale. Now, I think the Charisma Range Rover is a decent sort of guide as a proper 10th scale car. So if we put it next to that, you know, it looks about right to me. As a much smaller vehicle, that looks about right. If you look at the window apertures, that doesn't seem far off what you would expect the difference to be. And that the Range Rover is 29 centimetre, 290mm wheelbase. Now, someone else asked me about using one of these bodies, whether it would be suitable to use one of these bodies on a 10th scale, sort of class 2 or class 3 rig, something like that. So this LCG rig, this is 320mm-ish. So your sort of standard, sort of longer wheelbase. Now, if you wanted to try and use one of these, maybe if you bobbed it, it might work. Perhaps you could bob it along that line, if you cut there and tuck the body in, perhaps that would work. Just using the front, using it as a cab, might be quite nice. I'll show you the width for that. So might actually work quite nicely. Might work quite nicely, but not something I'm going to do. But as the question was asked, there's the answer. Once I'd done all my painting and put everything back together, or nearly put everything back together, I needed to plug the cables back in to the little combined speed controller and receiver, and we had a bit of a problem. I think I've encountered a problem. Here's what happens now when I plug the battery back in. Something gets hot, that chip gets very hot, and Oh, this is interesting because there's no flames this time because I've had fire twice plugging that back in. So I'm going to turn that off. We've got smoke. And hopefully WPL might be interested in that. So I've spoken to WPL about this problem with the board and the flames erupting from it, quite surprisingly. They are happy with their board. They don't see that there's a problem other than user error. But they are still being very, very good, I have to say. Their service has been excellent. They are sending me a replacement. So hopefully we won't have the same problem again. In the meantime, I've had to change over to some different radio gear in this. So we'll have to wait a bit longer to test their own RC gear properly. I've finished the paintwork, and now really the only thing to do, I think, is to add a number plate. So I used that Tamiya light metallic blue paint, and then I did a pearl finish on that. Everything else really is standard apart from a bit of paint, so just details like painting the locks and the antenna and bolts on the wipers, just tiny little details. What I did do, and I often do on cars, is I painted inside the light buckets. If you don't do that, you're going to very much get a spot of light right in the middle, not that sort of realistic balanced look. Fair play to WPL for adding yellow lights there, by the way. It's really nice. I also really like the mirrors that they give you, proper mirrors. You probably can't see on there because we've not got the light source right. Other little bits that I did paint the interior. I painted the seats two-tone and the dashboard, and did some lights and so on the dash for a bit more realism. It's quite hard to see, but it's just that subtle extra. And I have, of course, added a driver figure, as I always like to do. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I did intend to do a gloss finish, but there's a problem at the moment getting hold of the gloss spray cans from Tamiya. Something to do with them changing the stickers on the lid, I believe, which is a bit strange, but I went with adding a bit of pearl to it instead, and it's come up okay. It perhaps leaves me open to weathering the car a little bit more, but I'm pretty happy with it. Oh, the other thing I think I will do, I will paint these wheels, because gloss black, not a great look, although I'm sure there are wheels available. I'll do that, and I'll get some number plates, and then I'll be pretty happy. So there's only a couple of things that I've chosen to change so far on this. One is or maybe I should say two, are the drive shafts, because the horrible offerings that WPL give you as standard are just totally unacceptable. Interestingly, I have mentioned that to WPL, and they said they're aware of the problem and they're working on it. So we'll see what that comes to bring. The other thing I did was I removed one of the helper springs from these rear leaf springs. I'm not sure whether that will really have any effect, because I don't think they're really helper springs. I think they're just to make it look nice. So I might end up putting those back on. I'm not sure. And then, of course, there's the tucked away under here. I'm now running a Fay spare receiver and speed controller board, accompanied by this Fay transmitter, which I've just taken out of another truck because it was something cheap and available and small, and I didn't need to mess about with all the wiring and rewiring motors and so on. So until WPL get back to me with another board, that's what I think will stay in there for now. So all that is to do now is to take this little thing out on the trail.